Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly shot in the arm for motivation, inspiration, and education on your path to success with myopia management. And I have back with me for this edition of the podcast none other than two absolute legends, two Ortho-K experts, two myopia management specialists. You can see them at Vision by Design. And like I keep saying, when you go to Vision by Design, please walk up, introduce yourself, and say, hey, I saw you on the Myopia Mindset. Hello, Matthew Martin. Hello, Paul Lavine. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
I am so excited to be here.
All right. And this episode is going to continue on a trend that got created when we compared the practices of Matthew Martin and Paul Lavine. We found interesting pearls, interesting ways to compare how they do things. And we're going to continue in that. But before we get started, Matthew Martin, if anybody has questions for you about anything we've talked about in this episode, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me at Auburn Optical. That's AUBURN Optical @gmail.com. It is the name of our practice, but it comes directly to me. And if you have any interest in Ortho-K, if you're excited about Ortho-K, if you are stoked about Ortho-K like I am, reach out to me. Let's have a dialogue. Let's have a talk. I am in it to win it. And I was mentored by amazing people. And I want to help people to do the best specialty that is in eye care. There's nothing better. And Auburn Optical @gmail.com. Let's make it happen.
All right. And Paul, what about yourself?
Yeah, I can also be reached through Gmail at plevineod@gmail.com. And yeah, I'm same. I'd love to help and answer questions and just kind of motivate people. So I'm there.
Awesome. And you can find more episodes of the Myopia Mindset and if at myopiamindset.com. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so myopiamindset.substack.com. You can get extended versions of every episode that we do and a bonus episode each and every month, which I usually do with Carrie Herzberg. All right, so let's get started. Guys, I wanted to do a troubleshooting episode specifically, but I have a feeling we are going to get into so much more. And I'm happy for that because when I was working in industry and I would go to my accounts, I traveled all over the country going to different accounts to help them with their Ortho-K practice around the ability lens that I was selling at the time. And I would get all sorts of what I considered to be kind of fundamental questions because I grew up with guys like you, like learning from you. So I kind of took these things for granted. Let's start with the new patient experience because this is probably the number one thing that I would get asked about is how do I handle a new patient? I was shocked to find out that there were practices that weren't seeing their new patients day one. They weren't putting the lenses on the eyes, having them go home, wear the lenses overnight, and then coming back to see what kind of changes were made. So Matthew Martin, let's start with you. How does the new patient experience work in your practice?
Yeah, I think this is a really fun topic of conversation because obviously we have a lot of established patients at our office, but we are always starting new patients. I started 2 new patients this week. I'm starting 2 new patients next week. I mean, sometimes when it comes in waves and it comes in 2, 3, 4. We just picked up a family. And this family has 3 branches, and I think we're doing like 2 or 3 children of each branch. So one of the things that I run into is, and this is an interesting conversation too, Paul, and it's kind of, again, here we are. I didn't even give you a straight answer, and I'm going to jump into a sidebar, and that is,
sure.
Paul, what do you do with a family that has the same last name, but there's 3 different branches with 6 or 7 or 8 different names? How does your office keep track when, and again, this is something that I think is really important for new fitters, the people who are out there listening to this, and that is, if you sometimes you catch that patient where you fit the first family member and they're like, my other child needs it, and then my brother's children need it, and then my sister's children need it, and then all of a sudden you're off to the races, and you've got 12 family members all named Smith in the works. How do you, Paul, handle that? And I know I'm sidebarring already, but out of curiosity, what do you do, Paul?
I don't know if I really entirely understand the question, but because we kind of like schedule people by name and date of birth, and for me, I just sit down on my computer, click on the name that's on the schedule, and that's what pops up. So I'm not exactly sure. Maybe I'm not answering the question properly. Maybe I don't understand the question.
All right. Well, maybe what I'm trying to highlight is this, and that is for the people out there who are new fitters who are listening to this. Do you, Paul, in your practice, see situations where you fit a family member, and then you fit a sister, and then you fit the cousin, and then you fit another cousin, and then you fit a friend? I mean, how quickly does it spread when you do a good job? I guess maybe that's what I'm trying to get at here. Do you see clusters of family members or clusters of patients that come from a referral in your office?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't do any advertising. And so it's all word of mouth for me. And so the best word of mouth is happy families. So if it's if I fit sibling A and I know that sibling B is a couple of years younger and already starting to head into myopia, like we already start those conversations, like I know where that's going to go. But you get once you do a good job with one family member or one family, then all of a sudden they start sending their friends, and it just kind of builds up from there. And they usually say, oh, my friend so and so recommended you, or my son's friend wears lenses that you gave him, and we're interested and we want to find out more about this stuff.
So that brings me to a question, again, outside of what Matthew asked me, and that is, how do you handle the fees on that? Because we had this discussion today in my office, and maybe that's what I was trying to work through the whole time. And again, Matthew Herzberg has me on here, and he's like, oh, Lord, here goes Matthew Martin again. Who knows where he's going to go with this? In our office, we will give a discount to the second family member, and a lot of doctors don't do that. And I'm curious what your stance is on that, Paul. My answer to that is we give an extra 5% to the second family member that we see, and then we add that 5% to the third or fourth or fifth family member. Now, there's two arguments that can be made here. One argument is, why discount your fees 5% or 10% on second or third family members? And my argument is, once I teach the first child, let's say it's the eldest child in the family and they're age 12, okay? If I see that patient and then I see their 10-year-old sibling, it's much easier for me to do the second sibling because the parent knows, and I have an elder child who can help to guide the younger child in the process. Do you feel comfortable giving a 5% discount on a second child, or is that an anthem and not something that you would traditionally do?
Well, that's an interesting question. Now I understand. Okay. So there was a time in my career that I did indeed do just what you said, but I stopped. And the reason why I stopped was, there are multiple reasons why I stopped discounting. The first is and with all complete agreement, it is definitely easier to train a second or third family member than the first one, for sure. But it still takes me the same amount of time to assess, diagnose, design the lenses. I still have to go through the same process. I don't cheapen the process at all. And I don't want it by discounting. The parents might be thinking, well, if you can discount, then why'd you charge me so much for the first kid? You obviously have wiggle room there. And so I really stopped doing it. And by the way, sometimes the second or third can be a much more challenging case. That's the other thing. So, child A was a -2 OU, and child B has 3 diopters a cylinder. And so now all of a sudden, I should be charging more for that person, not less for that person. And the other thing that I will throw at you is, people tend to I try really hard for my patients not to develop bad habits, but sometimes people do. And the last thing that I want is for the older sibling to tell the younger sibling about the shortcuts that they've started taking. So I really try to treat every case as if it's a single, I don't care that your brother wears them. This is all about you now. So that's why I stopped discounting.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I had this discussion with my staff today. I feel comfortable, or had felt comfortable up until this conversation, giving a 5% discount on a second or third or fourth family member because it is inherently easier for me. Okay. But I will tell you that because my fees vary, I'm not worried about the second child being a -2 cylinder, because I'm going to come to that parent and say, look, your child has a -2 cylinder. I'm going to charge them X plus whatever. It's going to be a higher fee no matter what anyways. But I think that's an interesting discussion, and I'm glad you brought your viewpoint to the fore, because I may change my stance on that subject. I've always looked at it as 5% is a pretty small percentage if I'm doing a third or fourth or fifth child, because that family has invested a fair amount of money with me. And then at the year mark, our yearly program is going to be the normal cost anyways. So it's not like there's any type of benefit to them once we get past that initial fee. And this leads to, here's a discussion. I have a colleague of mine who is a protege of mine who I'm very proud of. And he works in a setting where they charge just, and I'm going to use what I think is a dirty word, just for the contact lenses every year. And I had a whole discussion about, what are you doing?
Right.
If you're listening to this podcast, if you're someone who's genuinely interested in myopia management in all its forms, low dose atropine, peripheral defocus contact lenses, orthokeratology, soon to be spectacle lenses, you should absolutely, positively, and I'm going to be real aggressive here, never charge for a piece of plastic or a product. You should be charging for a program. Paul, I assume your stance is the same here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm just driven crazy when I hear about somebody who is charging for a contact lens instead of an Ortho-K retainer, or who is charging for a drug instead of a low-dose atropine myopia management program. I think that they're doing a disservice to themselves. I think they're doing a disservice to their patients, and I think they're doing a disservice to their colleagues. What are your thoughts on that, Paul?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, why did we basically, as an industry, lose soft contact lens sales, essentially? Because it became so commoditized that patients stopped treating it as a medical device.
And it is a medical device.
That's the last thing we can have happen to Ortho-K lenses. They can't become a commodity. They have to maintain their position as a sophisticated and customized medical device. And so you're right. Yeah, you should. Calling it a contact lens is doing it a disservice. I agree. I mean, we use the term retainer. I know a lot of docs use the term mold, whatever, but we really try to stay away from the contact lens word. For sure.
Isn't the discount in general, the idea, kind of a disservice to the industry? I mean, I'm not trying to throw too much shade your way, Matthew Martin, but
I'm not offended. I am open to criticism. Part of being a doctor is knowing that I'm not always right. And this might be a perfect example of learning that I am wrong to give a 5% discount, which is a tiny little slice of the pie, but you're 100% correct. It's maybe something that I need to do. I've been on the fence about it before. My staff and I talked about it today. I think a discount maybe is disservice. Maybe it is disservice.
The practice I grew up in, huge Asian population of that practice, 80% of the practice or more was Asian patients. And anyone who's fortunate enough to really serve that community knows that they talk. Those parents communicate with each other. and they start generating referrals. Just like Paul mentioned, we didn't do any external advertising. It was all referral based. And this Asian network of patients would refer each other. And so the topic of discount came up quite a bit, because if I can bring in this other family with these two kids or whatever the case may be, can we get a discount? We didn't do it because, like Paul pointed out, you never know what you're going to get with those individual patients. Like the example that he made, when you're working with a family, you may have that sibling who requires way more INR time, or is not taking care of their lenses, or is an absolute nightmare when it comes to topography capture. And Paul, I reference the episode that you and I did together where you said, it kind of all evens out in the process. You may have some slam dunk easy cases, and then you may have some really difficult ones, and you need to charge appropriately because it all evens out in the end. And that's what you were saying. And on the other way of looking at it, as far as like charging for the lenses versus the practice, the experience, the doctor, I might be quoting Rob Garowitz here, but he was a huge advocate and probably still is about, you're not coming for the lenses, you're coming for me, the doctor, my staff, what we're offering you, a different experience. And I've seen this first case hand when you go to a practice and the practice has they've kind of charted out that lens fee. Oh, we need to make an adjustment, and the parents don't want to go because they don't want to pay an additional fee for the extra lenses. Well, and I would say, well, why didn't you cover that in your initial agreement? Like how much that would cost, or have a universal fee, or whatever the case may be. And they just would go like this and raise up, I don't know. So it's like, how did you guys come to planning that out for your practice? Did you, discounts aside, did you start with a universal fee? Does that cover atropine, MySight, Ortho-K? Does that cover everything? Do you charge differently for what you're offering? Matthew Martin, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic of conversation, and I'm glad we're on this. I just want to let everyone know who's listening that the only time I ever do a discount is with that second family member or third family member, and it never exceeds more than 5%. And it doesn't apply to the yearly amount. So I don't want people to think that I am in any way shortchanging myself or opening myself to the things that Matthew discussed earlier. Now, having said that, what I run into the most in this industry, and I know Paul is the same way, and I know your dad is absolutely on the same page with me with this, Kerry Herzberg, I'm sorry, one of the legends in our field, is absolutely on the same page with me. And that is that you need to charge appropriately. And you need to charge enough to make this exciting. And I talk about this from stage, and I know Paul does as well. If you're going to do myopia management, you need to be an expert. You need to have the education. You need to have the experience. And if you don't have the experience, you can gain it by simply doing it. And then you need to charge an appropriate amount. A lot of the patients are going to be straightforward. A lot of them are going to be easy fits, easy design, easy success, but you're going to run into ones that are difficult. I have one in my mind right now who is super complicated, translimbal hyperopic Ortho-K patient who has made me want to pull my hair out. I've probably spent 60% of the fees she paid in retainers for this patient. And yesterday she came in and she was happy, and it felt like the sun had come out of the clouds. Now, to compensate that, I've had 10 easy myopic children who I was like, this is wonderful, right? But I charge accordingly in order to make the whole thing flow. And I think it's really important for the people listening to remember, you need to have the expertise and experience, and you need to set your fees in such a way that brings you, who's that woman that says, an item must bring you joy? I can't think of who that is. She says that you should throw out stuff that doesn't bring you joy.
Right. The
minimalist. And I feel like myopia management should bring you joy. Paul, do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes the biggest difference, Absolutely. It brings me joy, but I mean, I think it also brings the patients joy for sure.
But I think you need to collect enough money and to have a fee that is a significant gestalt or brings in enough money so that the practice is successful even on the patients who are difficult or who are more expensive than others.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Paul was getting at earlier.
That's what Matt was just saying about the conversation that we had earlier, which is, even if you're on your sixth pair of lenses for your hyperopic patient, and you're taking a bath on that one, but you're so far in the black from all the other ones, that to me, I always just sort of looked at that as the cost of doing business, the cost of education. Make sure you learn something in that in that journey that you've taken with this patient. And now this patient is gonna they're gonna worship the work that you did for them, and not for nothing, but that patient probably knows that they were a challenging, and maybe they felt slightly embarrassed each time they had to go back because it still wasn't quite right, but you're going to get paid back in goodwill and the referrals that person's going to generate for you, I think. And that way makes up for, the extra couple of sets of lenses that you didn't plan on having to use.
Right. I've seen this firsthand. I was in Grant Miller's practice, and he would sit with these kids who we're just not getting INR, and he doesn't let them sit there for hours and hours. He has them come back, and he'll do, however many times it takes, as long as that kid still wants to try, he'll come in and help them with INR until they finally get it. And those parents have referred so many new cases to him because they really appreciate what he's doing for their kid. Matt, Matthew, you raised your hand. You have similar experience?
I may or may not have discussed this patient. We had a patient come in, very easy, -3, myope, maybe half diopter, 3/4 of diopter, still at 180. So nothing fancy. Should have been a cut and dry case. Came in and he would go to put the retainer in, and it would he was putting it on his forehead, Paul. He was like, woo! I mean, he was awful. He came in, failed, came in the next week, failed, took a month off, came back in, failed. He came in, honestly, I bet he came in 8 or 9 times. It was the worst, most stressful thing for my staff. I went through all my staff members. I have a staff member named Max who's been doing Ortho-K for 5 years, and he's amazing. He's going to be a doctor someday, an eye doctor, and I'm super hopeful that he'll come back to our practice. But he worked with this guy, and one of my staff members whose child does Ortho-K worked with him, and then my wife who did Ortho-K and our son does Ortho-K worked with him, and then another staff member who does Ortho-K worked with him, and it just went on and on and on. But he was such a trooper. He kept coming back. He's a hockey player. He's like, I don't like contact lenses. I'm super motivated. I really want to do this. He finally got it done. And it was like a miracle. It's like the sun shone upon the land. And it was wonderful. We were super patient with him. And he bought he must have spent $100 in Starbucks gift cards for the staff, which I thought was so amazing. And his grandma, who had come with him for about 30% of the visits, said this came out of his own money. This is his own money for his allowance that he saved up. And he bought my staff Starbucks gift cards. And he has told every person he's ever played hockey against how wonderful this is. And he's been great for practice management. And it's a perfect example of just being kind and my staff being there and him being willing to do it. And these cases come up so much. And I think Paul will jump in here. I think this is what makes what we do so amazing, is that it's so rewarding.
Definitely. I mean, that's a great story. That's such a successful, that kid or I don't know if he's a kid or young
Teenager.
man, but he'll be forever in your debt, for that. Like,
and you have examples like that too, I'm sure, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. And that really brings back to it really does loop back around to your staff and how important they are in this, in this specialty, because I don't know about you, but I'm not training that kid.
No way. No way.
Like my time is worth way too much for sitting there holding someone's hand, for 45 minutes, 14 times, so that's where your staff is so key, and making sure that they are just as excited about it as we are, because it's such a tremendous win for the entire practice when a case like that happens.
Yeah. How are
So
we falling
that's
into
awesome.
this trap in our industry, Paul? Like, I've been in so many practices where they don't have this all put together. They don't have their fee structure organized. They don't have an informed consent and an agreement, a contract. They're not presenting it. How did you get to this point? Like, obviously you didn't immediately start out knowing
No,
everything.
I'll tell you exactly how. I went to Vision by Design every year.
Yeah.
That's how. I didn't know my ass from my elbow when I first started. I didn't know about I should have this in my contract. I didn't even know I should have a contract, an informed consent document. I didn't. I was really fitting lenses and not a whole lot else until I started speaking to, the mentors that carried me through in the beginning. Carrie and Tom Washevsky, Rob Garowitz, Caroline. Like, so many people have helped me so much to understand, like, this is what you need to do. So honestly, for me, like, I'm not just tooting the Vision by Design or the AAOMC's horn, but like, you asked the question, that's the answer. That's how I knew that I needed to do those things. Nick Despotidis and Supercharge, all that stuff was so huge for me in the beginning. So, we always, the motto of just do it is it's not just learn how to fit a lens, right? It's learn how to manage a myopia practice. And I think that's the area that you've got to spend some time on when you're new to this. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel, because the wheel's been invented many, many times over. And one thing about orthokeratologists, especially the ones that are really good at it, is they love to share, and they love to teach, and they love to mentor, and they love to bring, new blood into the system. So, that's how I got to where I'm at. Certainly wasn't by myself.
It really makes me wonder why this is such a big issue when it comes to the corners that get cut so frequently. This is at the top of that list. Matthew Martin, like, how did you get to that point? I imagine it's a similar thing. Obviously, going to Vision by Design and being a part of the AAOMC, you have access to all of these great minds who are happy to share. How can we solve this problem? Cause this is what I faced when I was the executive director of the AAOMC, is like, we have this dedicated group of docs like you guys who like go to the meetings and become a part of the organization, but then you have everybody else, and they are like floundering at this. Like, they're walking into these traps where they are like charging the absolute minimum. They're undercharging. They're not taking the appropriate steps for success. Why does this plague our industry with these new docs? Why isn't this sinking in your opinion?
Well, again, if I could wave a magic wand and get every eye doctor to come to Vision by Design, I would do it. Number one, we couldn't handle the amount of people. But number two, it would just help so much from a practice management standpoint. I think this is an interesting conversation too, because I was talking to my staff today. We had a very busy day at the office. I had 2 or 3 or 4 Ortho-K follow-ups. I started a new patient today. I had a troubleshooting issue, which we'll talk about later. And then on top of that, on top of all those other things, I have to order retainers at the end of the day. There's all these kind of complications. I think it's easy to get lost in the forest for the trees, meaning that you're just treading water. You're seeing patients. I got a macular degeneration, glaucoma. I don't like the pressures over here. Visual field is manifesting something. Do I have to be concerned? I got a foreign body in exam room 2. I got a scleral lens that's complicated. I got a weird result on this. I've got this other thing happening. I think that we all get so wrapped up in the stuff that we're doing, we forget about managing the business that is also a part of what we do. Clinical stuff is important, but administration and practice management, which is really what we're talking about when we're talking about how to handle charges, how to handle education and training for the staff and training for the patients. I think all that gets put on the back burner because we're so doggone busy. And I think a lot of doctors get where they're just treading water. They're doing eye exams, they're watching their prescriptions walk, they're doing a complicated contact lens fit on a multifocal contact lens, which is admittedly pretty easy these days. But then the patient takes their prescription and buys them from someplace online, and they don't have the time or the bandwidth to pay attention to the practice management of myopia management or the practice management of a specialty care item. So I think doctors need to take a little bit extra time to try to elevate themselves from the grind and embrace the things they need to do to be successful. And one of the things that doctors can do, and I know I sound like...
All right, well, that's it for this regular version of the episode, but the discussion doesn't stop here. It actually continues in an extended version of this episode, which is available to our Substack supporters. You can, if you're interested in getting the rest of the episode, consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. In addition to an extended version of this episode and every other episode that we do, you'll also get access to exclusive monthly bonus episodes of the Myopia Mindset. And I know you're interested. You've made it this far. And for the cost is $12 a month, which is basically the cost of a cup of coffee each and every week. And that's how I like to put it. Listen, if you would buy me a cup of coffee each and every week to nerd out about myopia, to bring on amazing guests, to spread the word about how awesome myopia management is and how more ECPs should be engaged in this specialty, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. You can do so on our Substack. myopiamindset.substack.com is how you do that. Thank you so much for your consideration. I'll see you at the next one.